One of these was Victor Schauberger, an inventor who had produced models for a flying saucer. It had met the promise of a flying machine that could maneuver like a helicopter, but travel at supersonic speed undetected by the enemy. Schauberger's craft utilized a tornado-like vortex, which produced magnetic effects causing levitation.
Victor was recognized by the German government, actually met with Hitler, and later was inducted into the SS and put to work further developing this flying saucer concept.
He worked alongside a group of brilliant German engineers, including Rudolf Schriever, Andreas Epp, and Dr. Richard Miete. All produced highly advanced designs.
The Germans actually had three separate developmental areas for flying saucers, one at Peenemünde, one at Breslau, and the other at Prague. At all these three facilities, flying saucers flew.
The Germans had, in fact, gone far enough into development and testing that aircraft were in the air. And one company, Messerschmitt, and had flown a complete saucer-shaped aircraft.
These pictures of the early prototypes resemble photographs of UFOs that would emerge in the coming decades. But this was not the world of science fiction. These were highly advanced UFOs. For the German military, this lethal weaponry was being developed to win the war. The battle for air supremacy in World War II dominated the military struggle in Europe. By 1944, the tide was about to turn against Germany and Hitler's Third Reich. And then on June 13th, a week after the Allied D-Day landings, Hitler unleashed his deadly secret weapons. Over a period of 2 months, thousands of V-1 jet-powered flying bombs attacked London. Some were shot down from the ground, others in the air. This deadly development in warfare technology was to start a whole new era of military aviation history. The use of flying saucer technology to produce even more efficient killing machines was to be the culmination of this research.
During the Nazi period, we had a flowering of new thought, of scientific thought, of technological development. These scientists were freed up to do a lot of work. They developed science in every field that is relevant in our lives today, and as a matter of fact, we're still living off that carcass.
But there was nothing new about the basic principles of rocket science. Since the 1920s and 30s, there had been an explosion of innocent enthusiasts experimenting with rocket propulsion across Europe and America. But what the Nazis were doing was anything but innocent. At their deadly weapons research facilities, scientists were working on a new generation of weapons. And alongside the rockets and missiles, real UFOs were a crucial part of that program.
One of the incredible things that happened during the Second World War was the amount of technology that German scientists were turning out that was devoted to a war effort. And that included rocketry, it included the jet engines, but it also included some remarkable work in terms of flying saucer craft.
But time was running out for Hitler and his scientists. On all fronts, the Allies were breaking through. The Germans were in retreat. The flying saucer technology, just like all of Hitler's other ultimate weapons, would come too late.
Even right to the very end of the war, it seems they really believed that these super weapons, these super delivery systems, were going to be able to at least stall the Allies and they were going to be able to arrive at some sort of political settlement of the war.
Hitler's dream of winning the war with his super weapons never came. By May 1945, the final battle for Berlin had started. The war in Europe was virtually over. But this was only the beginning of the story of the real UFOs. Within 3 months, the Second World War came to a dramatic and horrifying end. At 8:15 in the morning of August 6, 1945, the Enola Gay, a B-29 American bomber, dropped the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima. With the war finally over, the former Allies had now become rivals. The Soviet Union and the West would soon be locked in a battle for the latest military technology.
Well, at the close of the Second World War, all the former Allied powers were engaged in a race to capture German technology.
Americans captured a complex for the manufacturing of B-2s and the plans for many other missiles, but the Russians captured the latest models of jet aircraft from the Germans and a good amount of rocket scientists.
But the key question was who was going to capture the real UFO scientists. The secrets of German rocketry and missiles was not the only technology to fall into Russian and American hands. The Cold War was about to begin, and alongside the very public nuclear arms race, with its displays of missile hardware, there was also another secret arms race going on, which the public knew nothing about. This time, to find the ultimate flying machine, a flying saucer from the world of science fiction. During the Second World War, there was a major technological revolution in jet propulsion, atomic physics, and real UFOs, flying saucer technology. The Germans had led the world in the development of real UFOs, and now their ideas and scientists had fallen into the hands of the two superpowers, Russia and America. German UFO flying saucer engineers Victor Schauberger, Rudolf Schriever, and a Dr. Mita were secretly working for the Americans, while Andreas Epp was reported to be working on flying saucer projects for the Russians.
Both Americans and Russians exploited really a lot the scientists that they captured at the end of the war. And they used this technology and these guys to develop their science during the Cold War.
By the end of the Second World War, the former Allies had become rivals, and the Cold War arms race had begun. The focus of the American efforts went on developing rocket and missile weapon systems. It seemed that the captured German flying saucer technology had been put on hold. Then in 1947, there was a report of a UFO flying over America seen by an American pilot, Kenneth Arnold.
He was flying near Mount Rainier in the state of Washington and witnessed 9 flying discs some distance from him.
When Arnold landed, he told his story to the local press.
I was approximately 25 to 28 miles from Mount Rainier, and I noticed to the left of me a chain which looked to me like the tail of a Chinese kite going at a terrific speed across the face of Mount Rainier. They looked something like a pie plate that was cut in half with a sort of a convex triangle in the rear.
Well, Kenneth Arnold started a firestorm. He was able to calculate from known landmarks how fast they were flying, and found they were flying at 12 or 1,300 miles an hour. And from his description, once he landed and gave this story to the press, he described these objects as if they were saucers skipping on water. And today, that's how we have the word flying saucer.
From out of nowhere, the flying saucer mystery is with us. What is the flying saucer? What do people see and sometimes photograph? What's behind the daily reports of aerial phenomena in the nation's press?
U.S. television and radio began reporting eyewitness accounts of members of the public who claimed they had seen UFOs in the skies over America.
I glanced up and there were 3 flying saucers in a V. approximately a half a mile away from me at an altitude of 350 feet.
Is this what Weisberger saw?
America was gripped with UFO sightings and flying saucer fever. The military was eager to deny it was anything to do with them, and went on television to reassure the American public.
We can say that the recent sightings are in no way connected with any secret development by any agency of the United States.
In my position in the Research and Development Organization of the Bureau of Aeronautics and of the Navy Department, I am thoroughly familiar with both our aircraft and our guided missiles programs and can state without reservation that the Navy has no saucer-shaped aircraft or missile in any of these programs.
Then in July 1947, in the midst of the UFO fever, came a startling report by another serving American officer. He announced to the press the discovery of remains from a flying saucer found in Roswell, New Mexico. Within hours, the story of the Roswell incident exploded around the world. The American military panicked. Again, they issued an official statement designed to reassure an anxious public, denying the remains were from a flying saucer. They maintained that it was simply a weather balloon. Behind all these American denials was a more ominous possibility for the military. Assuming the UFOs were not from outer space, flown by aliens, perhaps all these sightings were evidence of an enemy closer to home.
The American military were inundated by all kinds of UFO reports, and that drove them to the idea that perhaps some of those UFO missions were the Soviets in the air.
The Americans captured the very exotic blueprints of very advanced designs for aircrafts, and among them there was the Horten 229 by the Horten brothers. And this aircraft was very similar in shape to the first description of the flying saucer sighted over America in 1947. And the Americans were scared that the Russians could have produced actually a flying version of the Horten 229.
So in the immediate post-war years, reports of UFO sightings were part of the growing tensions between East and West as the Cold War grew in intensity. In the early 1950s, the Korean War had almost brought the world to a nuclear disaster. In America, the paranoia and the sense of fear of communist invasion was reflected in attitudes to flying saucers in popular culture.
Flying saucers have invaded our planet. Washington, London, Paris, Moscow are key targets. The whole world is under attack.
The 50s were the golden age of the flying saucer. People were scared by the Cold War. They were scared by the atomic experiments. They were at the same time very keen to the space exploration and to the advancement of technology, so the climate was the right one to expect extraterrestrial visitations from outer space.
Gee whiz! Invaders from Mars. He saw them land from outer space. He saw them capture innocent people only to destroy.
But for the American military, the continued rumors and speculation was ideal camouflage for the real UFOs. All over the deserts of America were sites like Area 51, White Sands, and Los Alamos, where alongside missile tests and space programs, there were hundreds of other mysterious top-secret projects. These included high-altitude parachute tests, satellite testing, and the development of future space vehicles. One of these secret programs was called Project Mogul. Project Mogul was a top-secret program to listen in on the Russians using equipment on high-altitude balloons. The American military were desperate to discover secrets of the Soviet program to develop a rival atom bomb. They needed to know when the Soviets were testing one of their weapons. It was not until 20 years later that the U.S. government was forced to confess that the Roswell incident, back in 1947, was in fact secret military testing by the Americans. They published a report which concluded that what was recovered was not the remains of an extraterrestrial spacecraft, but debris from a then classified Army Air Force research project, codenamed Mogul. But there was good reason for the Americans to be frightened of the Russians. The experience of the Korean War and the startling appearance of the MiG fighter had proved how advanced Russian military technology had become. America needed to catch up, and catch up fast. Could a supersonic flying saucer be the answer? In the 1950s, the race was on to build the ultimate weapon, a radar-invisible supersonic aircraft. What was needed was from the realms of science fiction.
The U.S. Air Force, in fact, wanted a new fighter interceptor, something that no Soviet aircraft would look like, a completely new airplane, one that could fly faster and higher than anything else in the air at the time.
In 1953, the CIA discovered that Avro, the Canadian aeronautics company, was working secretly on a revolutionary aircraft, a flying saucer. This was the brainchild of a visionary British aeronautical engineer.
The genius behind the Flying Saucer project was John Frost. He came from England as a designer on another project, but he soon became intrigued with the idea of taking flying saucers into the air.
John Frost had been responsible for one of aviation's most innovative developments, the swept-wing tailless fighter.
The inspiration behind John Frost's first ideas, in fact, came from his collecting a scrapbook of all the UFO reports that were being heralded all over the world. And through looking at every one of the reports, he began to start sifting them down to at least two possible sources. And one was man-made, and he traced it back to Germany.
Frost was intrigued by reports of the Nazi flying saucers.
And in fact, we now have evidence to show that he is a participant in interviewing German scientists, and especially one, Mitha, who would work directly with German flying saucers.
Dr. Mitha claimed that he had worked for over 10 years on the Nazi saucer program, and his team had actually built the flying prototype. Mitha showed Frost photographs, plans, and blueprints. Frost was convinced that he could turn Mitha's plans into reality.
John Frost had the promise of something that no one else could deliver at that point, a supersonic, more than twice as fast as the speed of sound aircraft that could fly higher and faster than anything else out there and never needed a runway or any airfield to operate from.
In 1952, the Canadian Avro Aircraft Factory concealed one of America's most highly classified and top-secret projects.
John Frost set up a secret group called the Special Projects Group. It was based on men just like himself, engineers and technicians and scientists that would work on his own ideas and ideas that would in fact lead to the flying saucer projects.
One of the aeronautical engineers who worked with John Frost on this revolutionary concept was David Garland.
Well, John Frost was frightfully English. You know, he was a typical English gentleman from the public school system, but with tremendous experience in the aviation industry. I'd say his enthusiasm was infectious. No problem was too big. There's a solution to every problem. In fact, we don't have problems, we have challenges. There were plenty of challenges.
John Frost's very first project is Project Y, a spade-shaped aircraft that's based around his circular pancake engine. It'll be able to take off from the ground vertically or in a rolling takeoff and fly as a supersonic interceptor.
Project Y was designed as a tailless jet engine aircraft. It was in effect using flying saucer technology. A spade-shaped mock-up was built by Frost's elite team in a heavily guarded workshop in the Avro factory. In 1953, a model with a delta tail jet flap for vertical takeoff control was secretly tested. The failings of the design soon became apparent.
One of the main problems with any tail-sitting aircraft would be that the amount of pilot skills that would be required to fly vertically from the ground in that position, and then, in fact, to return would be incredible.
John Frost now concentrated all the efforts of the Special Projects team on the development of a circular design, essentially a flying saucer.
The Circle is the most efficient ground effect machine. You get more lift for a given thrust around the periphery. So it makes sense when you're hovering in ground effect.
John Frost's next design was codenamed Y2.
And Project Y2 was a completely circular aircraft, now using a rotor system in the center of it and multiple engines on the outside edge, powering that rotor, giving it vertical takeoff and eventual direction so it could fly into altitudes that no one else could guess. It was a knife-edge supersonic fighter that he was selling. And at this point, the American Air Force bought in big time with a $10 million grant towards his research.
By 1956, the Cold War space race and arms race was at its height. The American military was desperate to invest in new weapons technologies. With clandestine American funding, the development of the supersonic flying saucer began.
In the Schaefer building was a full-size 50-foot diameter, 6-engine powered aircraft. Now, testing though proved that it was a dangerous beast, one that nearly killed the entire Frost team.
The test was nearly catastrophic. The engines of the saucer tethered in the hangar spun out of control and almost blew the roof of the research lab off.
John Frost decides that there's no way that he can continue this work with a complete flying saucer. Supersonic project is abandoned for the time being for him to build a smaller test vehicle that becomes the Avro car.
Well, the design specification for the Avro car was to fly at forward speed at 300 miles an hour, some modest kind of speed, but it had a high thrust-to-weight ratio greater than 1, and to fly at 30,000 feet altitude, and to land and take off vertically.
In 1957, Frost's prototype model finally rewarded the earlier American military investment in his project.
The Avro car was a scaled-down test vehicle that could do two jobs. One, it could provide a test vehicle for the supersonic craft that was still sitting in the Schaefer building. But secondly, it could be the flying jeep that the U.S. Army required. With weaponry, it could actually go on the battlefield as a battlefield weapon.
In 1959, the two vertical takeoff prototypes rolled out of the factory. The long-term aim was to produce a flying saucer that could reach over 1,500 miles per hour.
It did fly along the runways, de-icing the runways quite nicely, blowing ice and snow around. And it got into trouble over freshly mown part of the airfield when all the grass blew up and came back down in the intakes. And we started thinking about how to prevent what's called foreign object ingestion into the intakes.
The flying saucer flew several test flights, but its shape meant that it was incredibly difficult to steer.
It was a maze of challenges, and the biggest challenge that the concept faced was the pitch instability. The aerodynamic center being so far forward of the center of gravity. It's not a good recipe for a happy flight.
So the vertical takeoff and hover principle was working. Modifications were made, but lack of power and inadequate control mechanisms were difficulties that had to be overcome if the Avro car was ever to fly as intended.
Apart from the development of powerful pitch control, the only way that we knew to make a circular device stable was to have it spin, like a frisbee today. And the spinning action will impart stability. Some of John Frost's early designs did in fact have large spinning components, and the gyroscopic power of those devices was thought to impart some stability in designs which were thought to go as fast as 3 times the speed of sound.
Frost was convinced he could control the instability problem. But the Americans insisted on adding a swept tail unit. Frost considered this was a betrayal of his original concept. So in December 1961, the $10 million Avro flying saucer program was officially scrapped. But some of the engineers who worked on the project did not totally abandon Frost's dream.
There really is no aerodynamic future for a circular wing subsonically. Supersonically, with a few modifications and tweaking to its shape to make it a little more like a delta wing, one might see a possible outcome.
John Frost always believed his original concept was achievable.
Despite the unfavorable results of the Avro testing, the work that John Frost had put into the supersonic project showed that, in fact, it could have flown. And unfortunately, with the money eventually simply stopping, the company shut down the entire project. All the technology went back to the United States, who is the real owners now at that point.
The highly classified flying saucer technology went to America. But were these apparent public failures covering up a more covert flying saucer project that later, indeed, would work? This is Jack Pickett. 40 years ago, he was a publisher of U.S. military magazines. He even had positive security clearance. On a visit to MacDill Air Force Base in Florida, he was convinced he saw real American Air Force flying saucers.
There was no mistaking what they were. They were flying saucers. There was 4 of them parked in a row down at that restricted area of the base, and they ranged in size from 20 feet across to about 45 feet to, say, 70 feet, and then the biggest one was 119 feet across. Perfect circles.
Jack Pickett had been invited to the Air Force Base to write an article on the recently decommissioned aircraft. Pickett was even shown some remarkable photographs of the aircraft in the hangar.
He showed me photographs of many of these aircraft in flight, in formation. He showed me photographs of them with jet escorts, regular type escorts, flying with them.
Military researcher Michael Schratt has been investigating the Pickett story for the last 10 years.
This one was 119 feet across.
Schratt has worked closely with Pickett to produce a series of photo reconstructions of the experimental aircraft which Pickett saw. What Pickett was shown seemed incredible, but he was assured that indeed these were real experimental flying saucers, and this was the evidence that they had actually flown.
I said, well, how fast did they fly and how high? He says, well, we achieved space flight with them. And I asked him pointedly, any aircraft that flew that high and that fast, why are you discontinuing them? Why are you scrapping them? He says, well, we've designed better versions with less maneuverability problems.
Pickett wrote his article and was ready to publish, but at the last moment the Air Force withdrew permission and took back all Pickett's photographs. He stands by his story and remains convinced of what he saw.
Well, I saw the photographs of them in flight. I walked up and touched the actual aircraft themselves. I really examined them, and it was, no question about it, it was a remarkable aircraft, and it looked just exactly like what flying saucers are supposed to look like. In between...
Michael Schratt is convinced by all the evidence that indeed Jack Pickett's story is true.
I believe that these were the original, true, authentic articles because I've spoken to Jack for over 4 years now. He's remained consistent throughout, never changed his story. The aircraft that Jack kicked the tires on were capable of 15,500 miles per hour, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's still classified to this day.
Pickett's claims came against a background of heightened Cold War tensions. At the beginning of the 1960s, American U-2 pilot Francis Gary Powers was shot down on a spy mission over the Soviet Union. In Europe, the Soviets had built the Berlin Wall, dividing east from west. And with the Cuban Missile Crisis, the world had come closer than ever before to nuclear catastrophe.
This could be the beginning of the end for the...
As in the 1950s, popular culture reflected the fear and paranoia of the times. And again, it latched on to the threat from outer space.
The nations of the world mobilized their armed might, rushing to defend the Earth against the unknown weapons of the super race from the Red Planet.
There was suddenly a wave of UFO sightings.
We jumped out of the car and stood by the side of the road just as this thing passed over our heads, barely above the treetops.
It was hovering over the house and it was moving side to side directly over this house.
And as far as what it was, I wouldn't have the slightest idea.
I've been researching UFOs for the last 25 years, and I do believe that most, but all of us, of the witnesses are reliable people having seen something strange in the sky. Most of the times they have seen man-made phenomena or natural phenomena, like weather balloons, planets, satellite re-entries, stuff like that. But there is actually a small but significant percentage of sightings that cannot find any explanation at this time.
But there was one explanation for these mysterious UFO sightings, and it didn't involve extraterrestrial creatures.
I'm a great cynic about UFOs, and I would say in a single sentence that practically every UFO, other than those that are being taken by using saucepan lids, every UFO other than those has probably been under contract to the U.S. Air Force.
In the 1960s, Alan Brown was working at the Lockheed Secret Experimental Skunk Works in the Nevada desert. It was a time when both Russia and America were afraid of each other's nuclear strike capabilities. The Russians relied heavily on satellite technology to spy on the United States. The Americans invested mainly on manned surveillance aircraft. Lockheed had built the top-secret U-2 high-altitude spy aircraft, designed for covert surveillance over Soviet territory. But it was vulnerable to enemy radar.
When the first U-2 was shot down over Russia by surface-to-air missiles, it was recognized even before that time that the U-2's life probably wasn't going to be very long because it was not designed from a stealth point of view, and it was seen that they would have to do something pretty drastic to make improvements.
Flying saucer technology might produce the ultimate aircraft, one invisible to radar. A competition was started to replace the U-2.
Lockheed, in fact, won the contract, and I was involved with that in an airplane called Have Blue. And the program did change very quickly from a confidential clearance to a top-secret clearance when it was realized just the enormity of what could be done with an airplane which was essentially invisible to radar.
Over the next 10 years, shrouded in secrecy, a new generation of stealth fighters was rigorously tested in Area 51, the U.S. government flight test base in Nevada.
There's no question that you have to have large-scale testing over a large area, which means that there's going to be people on the periphery who are seeing these funny-looking objects flying around, which immediately get reported in the popular press as coming from Mars, Saturn, or you name it.
So Jack Pickett's story might be true. Throughout this period, it was the U.S. Air Force that was developing aircraft capable of evading enemy radar. Just what the pioneers of flying saucer technology always promised. What's more, 12 years later, there was another witness who seemed to confirm Jack Pickett's account. Warren Botts, an ex-8th Air Force pilot, saw an identical flying saucer aircraft hidden in a restricted hangar while visiting Wright-Patterson Air Force Base for a pilot's reunion.
To my surprise, I saw this huge disc airplane and was almost wall-to-wall in circumference, and it was jet-powered from what I saw. I started to walk over to look at it, not thinking anything about it, and an armed guard, stopped me and told me I'm not allowed to be in there. So I left, but I did see a large circular airplane in there.
Michael Schratt now had personal testimony from a second witness of the highly classified flying saucer.
He briefly described the exact same aircraft that Jack Pickett had seen it, and described other features that Jack didn't describe. And so when I put these two men together, then I knew I was dealing with a real subject.
Despite much skepticism, Warren Botts, like Pickett, remains convinced.
People that I spoke to since that time said it never existed, which I think they're wrong, because I know what I saw. I believe that we do have flying saucers. They did exist, and they do exist now.
What both men had seen was remarkably similar to the final John Frost Aerocard design, which the American military had reported as abandoned. Many believe that far from being abandoned, research into flying saucer technology had continued.
I think it's definitely being experimented today, because not only can get to your enemy completely unannounced, but you have radar invisibility, you've got the acoustic invisibility, no runways necessary, you have the potential to fly outside our atmosphere into space, and that is the holy grail that the U.S. Air Force always had wanted from the beginning.
There still remains much classified material on the development of flying saucer technology. But by the end of the century, American scientists and engineers had fulfilled many of the hopes and dreams of flying saucers, a fighting machine that could travel at supersonic speed, undetected by radar, based not on a circular disc, but a pyramid. For a period of 15 years, this revolutionary aircraft was classified as a black project, one of America's best-kept secrets. This was the ultimate real UFO, a supersonic strike aircraft, which flew like a jet, but with stealth unseen by radar. In 1988, the Americans decided to reveal it to the world.
There's an interesting aspect to the reason why the F-117 was exposed to the public at the end of 1988. The airplanes had been restrained to only flying at night. So the pilots are stuck into this airplane on a totally dark airfield in the middle of Nevada. And we, in fact, did finish up losing a couple of pilots by just purely being disoriented in night flying. At that point, the Air Force decided it had better start flying during the day, and if it was going to do that, it was going to give some indication of what was flying, so we weren't going to get a whole raft of more UFO reports.
In order to evade radar and surface-to-air missiles, the Lockheed stealth fighter, the F-117, adopted some of the concepts of the flying saucer. Principally, the idea of the shape of the aircraft determined its visibility to enemy radar.
We got a radar cross-section that was substantially better than anybody ever expected. And the main reason was that we took a different approach to analyzing stealth than had been done in the past, and found out that basically a very shallow pyramidal shape with highly swept back edges gave a much lower cross-section than anything had been done before.
Within 1 year of the stealth fighter being declassified, the Soviet Empire began to disintegrate. On November the 9th, 1989, with the collapse of the Berlin Wall, the borders between East and West Germany were open. The Cold War effectively had come to an end. But it wasn't long before the stealth fighter saw its first combat spearheading the assault against a new enemy in the Iraq War. Its invisibility to radar, combined with precision bombing, shocked the world.
We could go in there, drop the bombs exactly at the altitude we wanted to with enormous precision, and take out exactly the targets we needed without being seen. And the whole of the Gulf War in the 1991 period was conducted where we had thousands of sorties and we didn't even get a scratch on one of our airplanes.
The unique abilities of the stealth fighter were demonstrated in the Gulf War, but there remained one basic failing. It had to be designed around the needs of a pilot.
Future fighting machines are going to be pilotless. I think the cost, politically and morally, of losing highly trained crew these days seems to point in the direction of UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles.
There is nothing new about the concept of pilotless aircraft. From the early days of flight, many have experimented with the idea. Some with a degree of success. The development of unmanned spaceflight has opened up future aviation possibilities.
The biggest issue in the future is certainly unmanned aircraft. And we can also go down to miniaturized airplanes, which are the order of 6 inches in diameter, and fly those into buildings. And in fact, the whole scope of what can be done in the future is just enormous. It's mind-boggling.
The future is, perhaps, in this new generation of flying machines. The latest Sikorsky Aerobot is capable of high-speed hovering, vertical takeoff, and landing. But these vehicles seem a long way from the dreams of Hitler's flying saucer engineers. Machines on the edge of science fiction, capable of phenomenal supersonic speed. Perhaps the science of flying saucers was never a reality.
As long as you stay close to the ground, you've got yourself an efficient lifting device. It does not make an efficient wing in free air at all. It's just not an efficient shape. And only flying saucers from outer space have been able to do anything with it. And I think they're probably just a figment of the imagination.
Others insist not only that the dream of flying saucer technology is possible, but that concealed from us all, it has already been achieved.
I think that this is the biggest secret that the U.S. Air Force has, and I believe it's high time that the facts about the U.S. Air Force jet-powered flying wing disc program be declassified. There's absolutely no...
The notion of a universe inhabited by alien creatures can be found just about everywhere in American popular culture, especially in movies, books, and on television. But as far as the mainstream is concerned, the idea that life on other planets not only exists, but has at any time made its way to our planet, is considered the stuff of science fiction. And those who differ with that conventional wisdom are subjected to ridicule, scorn, and in some cases, government scrutiny.
Just because we can travel from star to star doesn't mean another civilization who is potentially 10,000, if not 100,000 years older than us can't do it either. That's the height of human arrogance. Yet we are saying all of this is just nothing but fantasy.
Could mankind really have been visited by alien beings from other worlds? And might the truth have been kept secret for centuries? Roswell, New Mexico. Here in the flat, thirsty lands of the American Southwest lies a remote city of 50,000 residents. Once the home of America's largest strategic air command base, it has now become ground zero for UFOologists and believers in all things extraterrestrial. thanks to an incident that happened on the evening of July 8th, 1947.
Following a major thunderstorm, Ranger Mac Brazel came across this really extensive area of debris, stuff he had never seen before. He brought it to the local sheriff's office. They both thought it might be military because in 1947, Roswell was home to Roswell Army Airfield, the home of the 509th Bomb Wing. The base sent Major Jess Marcel, the intelligence officer, and at that point, it basically became a military site as they gathered up every bit of debris they could find.
Early on, they issued an official sanctioned press release from Roswell Army Airfield saying, "We have captured a flying saucer." The next day, higher authorities said, no, wait, no, they were wrong. It was just a weather balloon.
Something clearly landed in 1947. I've personally spoken with the Jesse Marcel family, and they're absolutely convinced that what they saw was not of this earth. He knew what a weather balloon was. He knew that this wasn't a weather balloon.
They moved in with the military. They scraped up the whole area, and they have since tried to act like that nothing had happened.
National Enquirer took the story and ran with it, and that made it even more popular. And the moment that happens, you can start to count like the number of column inches devoted to a subject. And that's what generates a myth.
The Air Force added more twists to the Roswell mystery beginning in 1994, with a statement that what crashed at Roswell came from a top-secret experiment called Project Mogul. 3 years later, the Air Force reported that the alleged alien bodies were in fact dummies, attached to parachutes as part of a flight test.
Except that doesn't make any sense either, because if you're going to test ejection seats or cockpits or parachutes or whatever, you're going to use a human-sized dummy, right? You're not going to use a 4-foot-high, big-headed, alien-looking creature. So the whole thing is it's just almost laughable.
The Air Force's conflicting reports about what was recovered at Roswell ignited the flames of a conspiracy theory that continues to this day. But why the changing stories? What was, or is, the government hiding?
I think the truth is that something very unusual happened at Roswell. Now, how many aliens there were and what kind of ship it was and where it came from, we don't know, because they've covered it up. They've hidden it away.
They might think we can't handle the truth. They may think that they can't control us. There could be all kinds of causes and reasons for the suppression. Maybe they were told not to tell us. And so one of the reasons could very well be why government does not tell us, why they keep this in this book of secrets, is simply to protect us from panicking.
If there is evidence, allegedly the government would want to keep that secret, hide it in a warehouse out in the desert someplace.
The key motives for keeping the UFO extraterrestrial issue secret falls into, I think, two broad categories. Number one, weaponry. They view any exotic technology as possible weapons, and therefore it's got to be kept secret. And number two, any advanced technology could shake up the monopolies that the ruling elite enjoy in this country, and so they've got to keep that secret.
But where is the proof that the government hid advanced technology found at Roswell?
I think a tip-off to the fact that we got hold of ET technology at the Roswell crash is simply for the fact that up until about 1947, 48, 49, technological advancement was one of slow evolution. But after about 1950, you saw a literal explosion of technology. Fiber optics, night vision, computerization. Where'd all that come from? I think we were picking up technology from some other outside source.
Might the U.S. government's advanced weapons technologies been the result of access to extraterrestrial intelligence? According to authorities, such theories are absurd. The lunatic notions of a conspiracy-hungry public.
In many ways, the mainstream completely marginalizes the idea of extraterrestrials coming here. They give it no credibility at all. And yet, what is so strange about the idea that extraterrestrials should come here? We know we're probably not alone in the universe, and we ourselves are trying to go to other planets. Why wouldn't they come here?
For those who adhere to the audacious notion that planet Earth is no stranger to alien visitation, evidence can be found in historical events from the ancient past. And for some, the proof is right before our eyes. Coming up.
That's one small step for man.
Neil Armstrong allegedly saw a UFO lifting up out of a crater on the moon.
Armstrong said, wow, look at these babies, they're huge.
Contact light. Okay, engine stop. We copy, get down, Eagle. Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
On July 20th, 1969, in what was arguably mankind's greatest technical achievement, Apollo 11 astronauts Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin became the first humans in history to step foot on the moon.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
More than 125 million people watched the event live on their television screens. But then, for a period of 2 nail-biting minutes, the transmission suddenly went dead. The official reason was technical difficulties. But there are many who believe those 2 minutes were recorded, but censored, due to the strange things the astronauts were reporting back to NASA.
Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin actually saw things taking place on the dark side of the moon, and they were told they were not allowed to go there. And these were not Earth-based technologies.
Neil Armstrong allegedly saw a UFO lifting up out of a crater on the moon.
Armstrong said, wow, look at these babies, they're huge. And that they were ships up there watching them.
UFOs on the moon? Witnessed by astronauts Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin? A delusional conspiracy theory? Or a government cover-up? 2 facts are certain. The world watched as beings from one world landed on another. And a book, published just 1 year earlier, was now flying off store shelves. Written by Swiss author Erich von Däniken, Chariots of the Gods made a compelling case for the notion that many of the world's ancient archaeological mysteries had otherworldly origins.
The whole idea is extraterrestrials have been coming to Earth for thousands of years.
The best case worldwide is Nazca. I was one of the first who was in Nazca. Nazca is in Peru, about 500 kilometers from Lima. When you fly over the desert, you see gigantic lines. They look like airstrips. Seen from the air, they give you the imagination of airstrips. They look like, because they start abruptly, end abruptly.
Von Däniken's book also reported findings in the western United States of cave paintings of gods resembling strange creatures from another world. And other ancient images could be found in Italy that bore a striking resemblance to astronauts in spacesuits.
We have worldwide similar cave paintings. The so-called gods are always the one with the helmets and their halos. Now, if something happened just on one continent, let's say the Africans would do this, I would be quiet. But I clearly can prove that these so-called gods with the helmets and the halos you find worldwide, thousands of years ago, where our forefathers had no connection to each other. So why this? Because they saw the same thing.
Within a year of Neil Armstrong's first walk on the moon, Chariots of the Gods had sold 60 million copies and had been printed in 32 languages. It ignited belief in what has since become known as the ancient astronaut theory. But it also sparked controversy, even derision, from archaeologists, religious scholars, academics, and even the mainstream media.
Chariots of the Gods was on the market in the German-speaking world in February 1968. About 1.5 months later, it was on top of every best-selling list. And it took about maybe 3 or 4 weeks. Then the critics began.
It was outrageous. It collected a bunch of things and put them together in a way that was completely outlandish, yet so compelling that people wanted to believe it. And people want to believe that aliens visited Earth in the past and that they helped us with the pyramids and with the Nazca lines and that ancient aliens gave us technology. But the reality is, there is no robust evidence that aliens have ever visited Earth.
The theory incorporates a whole bunch of different hypotheses and facts and evidence all converging to a particular conclusion. In this case, that we were visited by aliens in ancient times, and the fact is we weren't. There's no evidence for this at all.
If there were an American book of secrets about extraterrestrials, it would say there that the only species able to colonize our universe is us.
9 months after his book's release, Eric von Daniken was arrested for fraud, embezzlement, and forgery in connection with loans he had secured to finance his research. A coincidence or a punishment intended to discredit and even silence his increasingly popular theory?
There's a natural suppression of this idea that extraterrestrials are here. And even if there is overwhelming evidence for it, even the governments are going to want to keep a lid on this.
The ancient alien theory has been looked down upon by academia for a very long time. And that's okay, because we have to understand that science always has this status quo. And it's the status quo that needs to be maintained.
40 years later, the questions are still out there, and some are still being posed. And science is still coming up with no answers, because for 40 years, they have been unwilling to address it.
The possible conspiracy would be there is such power in these ideas, revolutionary, world-changing, social upheaval could follow if, in fact, these all came out.
Could there really be a global cover-up of ancient alien activity? One that shields the public from a profound knowledge that, if revealed, could shatter the very fabric of our civilization? Even distinguished NASA astronaut Edgar Mitchell, the lunar module pilot for Apollo 14 and the 6th man to walk on the moon, says the answer is yes.
I think that the evidence of ETs and aliens being here, which I'm convinced they have been, are sufficient evidence in itself that they come from some other place.
What we're going to find is not only that we are not alone, but also that our entire history needs to be reanalyzed. Everything what we know about the past all of a sudden has to become inclusive of visitors from elsewhere.
Coming up.
The President of the United States cannot even get to this information.
We spent some time looking at this, but there was nothing conclusive.
There's that very high likelihood that the secret is here and we don't know about it.
In 1974, Sun Classic Pictures, an independent production company specializing in family-friendly documentaries, released a feature film version of Chariots of the Gods to theaters across the United States, grossing nearly $26 million. It helped fuel the flames of a growing interest in the ancient astronaut theory.
When Chariots came out, I was in college, and I remember it was a big pop culture thing. I mean, it was a huge story, and I thought this would be fantastic if there was something to this.
For the first time ever, the idea that extraterrestrials might have visited Earth in the remote past was being popularized. You have to understand that in the 70s, the country was in upheaval, people were unsatisfied with what was going on in politics and all this. Very reminiscent of what is happening today, by the way.
The willingness on the part of the American public to embrace many of the film's audacious claims was due in no small part to a growing cynicism and anti-establishment attitude. One that took root in the era of Vietnam War protests and the Watergate scandal, particularly with the generation known as baby boomers. Now, everything was being questioned, especially organized religion and even the existence of God.
The slow erosion of mainstream religion and the rise of New Age spiritualities and that sort of thing, the alien hypothesis became much more popular. There was a more of a receptive audience for it, that they are beings out there coming down here, which then finally also has religious overtones.
Von Däniken takes a very stimulating theological stance. He has an explanation for the gods that both questions and challenges traditional explanations of what gods are or what God is.
Chariots of the Gods was quite timely because we ourselves just became extraterrestrials on the moon. Space exploration at the time was huge.
Even more evidence of the ancient astronaut theory's growing attractiveness could be found in popular culture. Primarily in films like Star Wars, which places its high-tech world of robots and lightsabers not in the far future, but a long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away. Similarly popular was Battlestar Galactica, a fantasy adventure television series which told the story of a doomed humanoid race in search of a home planet. Its use of Egyptian-style spacesuits and other ancient iconography seemed to validate von Däniken's notion that the people who built the pyramids may, in fact, have come to Earth from other worlds.
The idea of there being extraterrestrials out there, this is called the plurality of worlds debate. It's been around since the ancient Greeks. So it's just a small extension to go from they're out there to they've come here.
But there were those for whom the idea of extraterrestrial beings traveling to Earth and influencing its history represented not a far-fetched theory, but the lowest and most dangerous form of pseudoscience. They called ancient astronaut theory everything from racist and colonialist to downright nonsense. And these were members not only of the religious and scientific communities, but of the presumably more open-minded world of academia.
When Chariots of the Gods came out, it created a revolution because people either loved it or hated it. Mostly the ones who hated it were the academics, because they somehow felt that this notion that we had been visited by extraterrestrial beings was simply impossible. Eric von Däniken had to be wrong. And what they were confronted with was the fact that these questions couldn't be answered by science. Science was basically saying that there was no validity whatsoever.
Chariots of the Gods actually really did have an effect on me,
because when I see what I call outright bad science, it really gets my hackles up. And when I listened and read about and saw different shows on these different hypotheses, it often ended up sort of screaming matches at the television screen about, that's the dumbest thing I ever heard.
I don't think the Earth has ever been visited by any extraterrestrials. I find it striking how we humans have again and again underestimated the technological capabilities of ancient peoples. We tend to be a little bit arrogant and say, those loser Egyptians and Greeks, you know, what do they know?
Is ancient astronaut theory really as anti-scientific or preposterous as its detractors believe it is? Or could there be another, perhaps more secret reason for the mainstream resistance to the idea that alien visitors have been coming to Earth for centuries?
Having a new idea of religion, a new revelation of sorts, is going to challenge any established belief system and the institutions that support that belief system. That established economic interest would be concerned about the technology, the advances, that it could disrupt markets, could disrupt their own financial interests.
But there is one branch of the government that is reportedly very open to the idea of extraterrestrials in our midst. The presidency. In his first days in office, President Bill Clinton is said to have asked two questions. Who really killed President Kennedy? And what is hidden at Area 51?
If the United States Air Force did recover alien bodies, they didn't tell me about it either, and I want to know.
The administration of President George H.W. Bush also made a secret investigation into the possibility of alien visitors on planet Earth.
The alien situation is very interesting. We literally spent some time looking at this, but there was nothing conclusive that came of it.
Nothing conclusive? Can it really be that the nation's highest office cannot confirm or deny that alien visitors on Earth do not exist? Or is it possible that the truth about UFOs and alien astronauts is being kept hidden, even from the president?
I think most presidents have tried to find out what's going on, and I don't think they get through the door. I don't think they're told. But there's that very high likelihood that the secret is here, and we don't know about it.
Various people in the Obama administration have expressed a deep interest in UFOs. But in all cases, what we hear is that somehow the UFO secret is not something which is to be shared to the president.
So that means the president of the United States cannot even get to this information, which I think should raise the question in everyone's mind, well, who does get to this information? And who exactly are they to keep it from everyone, including the president?
The relationship between the President of the United States and other worldly beings stretches back to the very founding of the country. From its earliest days, the U.S. government has been associated with signs, symbols, and allusions to cosmic contact.
The founding fathers of America were very open-minded and forward-thinking people. Thomas Jefferson reported seeing a UFO. Benjamin Franklin wrote that he believed in life on other planets. Even George Washington had a portrait made of himself that has a UFO in the sky. So you have this idea of the founding fathers even possibly being influenced themselves by extraterrestrials.
But why? If the nation's highest office remains curious about the possibility of alien visitors, is the notion so scoffed at by those in the scientific community? Is there a cover-up? Or do they think mankind is not yet ready to handle the truth? Perhaps the answer lies in the Book of Secrets. Coming up.
Suddenly, the Vatican is saying, yes, there's other life on other planets. We're going to be looking for it, too.
What's at stake for organized religion? Power and control.
On May 13th, 2008, the L'Osservatore Romano, the semi-official newspaper of the Catholic Church in Rome, published an interview with Reverend José Gabriel Funes, the Jesuit priest who served as director of the Vatican's observatory at Castel Gandolfo near Rome. Bearing the headline, "The Extraterrestrial is My Brother," Funes made a remarkable and audacious admission that there is no conflict between believing in God and the possibility of intelligent life on other planets. In one swift move, the Roman Catholic Church had contradicted centuries of its own teachings.
This would really break the mold of our current understandings of religion and understand that a lot of the things we thought were mythology were actually fact.
Why the change in attitude? Did the Catholic Church discover evidence of life on other planets? Or might it be the time was right for the Church to admit something it had known to be true all along?
The Vatican has some of the most advanced telescopes in the world. They have some of the most advanced radio telescopes and transmission and communication equipment in the world. I think they know the same things our military-industrial complex knows, which is this is all very real, and that eventually it's going to come out.
I think the reason why the Vatican came forward and endorsed the idea of searching for extraterrestrial life is because the Vatican wants to be ahead of the curve.
The Vatican Observatory's announcement also included plans to explore the outer planets and their systems, with a particular concentration on Saturn's moons Titan and Enceladus.
They said that they would be involved with the search for extraterrestrial life. So suddenly, the Vatican is saying, yes, there's other life on other planets. We're going to be looking for it, too.
Could Saturn's moons really hold the key to the extraterrestrial origins of life on our planet? And is the Vatican really admitting that the Earth's ancient religions might in fact have extraterrestrial origins? Even believers in ancient astronaut theory remain skeptical.
The idea that the source of ancient religions might actually be interaction with extraterrestrials is not an idea that organized religion wants to promote.
What's at stake for organized religion? Power and control. It's that simple.
There are many in the ancient astronaut community, however, who claim that many of the beliefs and teachings that comprise the world's religions serve not to contradict the possibility of alien life, but to confirm it.
One of the biggest points of reference for the ancient alien theory are the sacred books, sacred texts that we can find all around the world. And those sacred texts, in many cases, describe people from the stars descending in some type of flying machines.
The Vatican's bold admission that the possibility of intelligent life in the universe seemed to validate what scientists and cosmologists like Stephen Hawking had believed for centuries. But it also gave fresh credibility to another, perhaps even more controversial theory, that of intelligent design.
Intelligent design is a theory having been promoted now for about 2 decades. that says evolutionary development is not strictly a matter of chance, that actually higher organisms are designed by an intelligent designer. They're not simply accidents of biological contingency.
Of course, the notion that the universe and all living things are more likely the product of a godlike being or entity was not new. Virtually every religion across the globe has embraced the concept for centuries. But intelligent design was now being championed by powerful political and religious conservatives, people like Republican Party activist George Gilder, whose Discovery Institute in Washington, D.C. stands at the forefront of what detractors would call this subversive and pseudo-scientific concept. It was seen by the mainstream as an attack on the theory of evolution, and therefore threatened the integrity of modern scientific thought.
Those disciples of Charles Darwin who advanced evolutionary theory, and today we call it the neo-Darwinian synthesis because genetics explains variation, it's important to note these are chance events that lead to the development of new species. Intelligent design people want to say it's not just chance, it's the intervention of an intelligent designer. Who is that intelligent designer? Well, St. Thomas Aquinas would say, we all call that designer God. But intelligent design people say, we have no opinion on who the designer is.
Do proponents of intelligent design really have a secret agenda to undermine conventional science by promoting the belief in an almighty creator? Or is it an ingenious means of bridging the enormous gap that exists between those who believe in Charles Darwin's secular theory of evolution and those who believe that mankind might also owe its very existence to beings from other worlds? Perhaps the ultimate answer can be found in the covert messages that are being transmitted throughout our galaxy, even as we speak. Coming up.
Transmitting signals into space saying, hey there, here we are, is an absolutely idiotic thing to do.
Dr. Stephen Hawking suggested that they would come here to destroy us.
"290 miles north of San Francisco is an open field that many scientists believe could hold the key to contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. At the Allen Telescopic Array, radio receivers and giant transmitters are part of a global scientific network called SETI.
I think that the goal of the SETI program, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, is extremely important. We look at our universe and we just have to know, are we alone? Or is there anybody else out there?
Among SETI's favorite cosmic targets are areas called Goldilocks zones.
The Goldilocks zone is a zone around a star where the temperatures are not too hot, not too cold, but just right for liquid water to exist. All life on Earth requires liquid water. So we believe that the best way to search for other planets with life is to search for planets that have liquid water. And just as technology has begun to see planets that may be able to have life, that type of planet appears to be everywhere.
So the million-dollar question is if we can find an otherwise decent planet around a star in its Goldilocks zone, because that's where we have the greatest chance of finding extraterrestrials.
Could there really be an abundance of livable planets in the universe? And might SETI really detect intelligent life on one of them? But how?
There's two senses in which you could detect intelligent extraterrestrial life. One is in just the noise that they generate. If you think about our society, we now have TV, we have cell phones, we have all sorts of technology that radiates out into space and could in principle be detected. The other is we have changes in our atmosphere that we've generated by being on the planet and doing stuff that in principle could be detected.
It is very much like looking for a needle in a haystack, because we're using radio astronomy, we're analyzing radio waves in an effort to try and find out whether amongst the millions of signals which we get on a daily, if not hourly basis from space, whether somehow in there is an alien communication.
Could the very existence of SETI, along with NASA's mission to Mars and other planets, be proof of the U.S. government's secret belief in the ancient astronaut theory? And if so, would we be prepared in the event of a real-life close encounter?
UFO activity has been going on for thousands of years, and we have been monitored and watched since the beginning of our civilization.
The U.S. military and even the United Nations has stored away some contingency plans in the event that aliens should show up, you know, either benign or otherwise. They would be remiss in their job if they didn't have such contingency plans.
Are there secret files and covert plans under lock and key? Have there been exercises and other preparation work? If the truth finally comes out, might proof of life on other planets crumble the foundations of government, religion, science, and our society? Or would it reassure us by revealing at last the truth about our origins?
If an American book of secrets existed, then the chapter on ancient astronauts would suggest that we shouldn't look for our origins on planet Earth, but that in fact our origins lie out there.
Might SETI be on the brink of an incredible discovery? Or are they, as some experts warn, setting planet Earth up for a mega disaster?
Transmitting signals into space saying, hey there, here we are, is an absolutely idiotic thing to do. I mean, seriously, you don't stream in the jungle. If you were a pig living on an island of pigs, very happily doing all your pigly stuff, would you like for the human neighbors on the island next to you to know that you're there? Don't think so. We humans are newbies on this stage. We don't know who's out there.
If they were hostile and wanted to end the experiment we call humanity here, they could do so, because they would have the technology to do so.
If this universe is made up of the same primordial soup, then you have to assume that not every being in this universe is enlightened and nice. So it's very possible that there's a sect of extraterrestrials that are coming to this planet, and they're doing some very strangely evil things.
Dr. Stephen Hawking suggested that SETI should stop sending out signals or searching for signals, because the moment that extraterrestrials found out that we are here,